Welcome, everybody. Scott Stevens here with a look at another perspective, our twice a week show, Mondays and Wednesdays, where I get to talk about some topics outside of the normals. You can connect with us in the podcast at metadimedigitalco.com, another perspective and dash podcast, or Twitter at Weather Wars Info, Facebook at scott.stevens.2021, and Instagram Scott Stevens 2891, or the website, which we're working on now, scottstevens.co. Those are our connect locations. All right, this week, and if you've been with us a couple of weeks now, we kind of talk about just the situation we find ourselves in. And every single night when you turn on the TV, listen to NPR, you've got to ask yourself, is it fake, or might what they're telling me be real? This is a real situation when we have governments, companies, individuals with agendas, organizations also with agendas that are trying to sway our opinion. And when they capture our attention with a stated opinion, then we are on their side. We either accept the opinion, we accept the news, we accept the narrative, or we choose not to. And every moment of every day, we're asking ourselves, now probably more and far more than my parents ever did, although this game was in place even then, decades and centuries ago. What the king said, what the president said, what the prime minister said, was it factual? Or were they trying to guide the population into some kind of conflict or resolution, or agreement was something else that had to be presented to people? And so these are situations that we find ourselves in, and we need to consider all of the information. So we're going to go through a couple of slides here. We got a few going on. What was new to me in the last decade is this term fake news. And I remember when this came out, probably 2013, 2014, some, not undergrad, but maybe it was a doctoral student, created a list of what this person, this gal, termed fake news sites. And a few of those that I see regularly, Geoengineering Watch, Dane Whittington's geoengineering website was high on that list as total fake news. Although if you were to ask Dane Whittington, is what you're presenting the people fake news? He would say, absolutely not. This is a truth that just has not been accepted yet. Okay, I could get on board with that, but the list of sites that she came up with, and I should have brought that up, but it was ridiculous because there was absolutely a political slant to it. It wasn't objective with any stretch of the imagination. She had just gone through the list and created a list. Good to see you guys on there. Glad to have you aboard. And then Karen, glad you're back as well. And then Ryan, you the man. We'll hit some of the topics that you and I, Ryan, had talked about. We had talked, we'll get to that towards the end of the show. And Sasha, I hope you're having a good Monday, young lady. All right, so fake news, it's everywhere and it's all the time. So what is fake news? It's a term, and this is from University of Michigan, the guides from their library. It's a term that has come to mean different things to different people. Exactly. At its core, we're defining fake news as those news stories that are false. Agreed. The story itself is fabricated with no verifiable facts, sources, or quotes. Sometimes these stories may be propaganda that is intentionally designed to mislead the reader, or it may be designed as clickbait. It's for profit. So what's the difference between propaganda and fake news? A lot of folks have started using the words fake news to mean any news that is slanted or biased or that they don't like. I've settled on that one as being a source of a lot of fake news, or shall we say the branding or categorizing of particular news that falls outside of a certain group's accepted narrative. It's just news that they don't like. That isn't what fake news is. Fake news is a fiction that is disguised as news. The first term came into use, and just FYI, I use DuckDuckGo for the search engine and these captures. We're going to try to stay as unbiased as possible. And the battle of AI versus AI, this is becoming, or will become, and has become a very, very interesting topic over the next couple of years. And in the weather show just a bit ago, there was a guy who said that Trump, if he wins, will likely be the last president elected by a relatively unbiased electorate, because the AI is getting so good, so finely tuned to everybody's social media feed, that everything we like, everything retweet or comment on, that goes into a list. And so the algorithm feeding me information versus Sasha or Karen or Ryan are all going to be a different set of stories. So we're creating our own digital universe. And what isn't fed to us is termed propaganda, is termed is termed fake news. So we're going to look at the Iceberg Model. And there was a book called the Four Truths, and one, why can I not remember? The first one is never assume. That's the first rule. The four rules is to never assume, because likely you'll only be assuming with the information you have available inside you already. To assume something is going to you make it your own. Whether it's correct or incorrect, you've made an assumption. But then I'm gonna preface that with, but always assume that what is being presented is but the tip of the iceberg, that visible event, that which is happening. And resting on the events that we can visibly see are patterns of behavior and the trends that are occurring over time. So there's this, let's just use it, racial unrest that's happening, and these events now come above the water. They come into visibility, and then they get attention. But is it that single event that is happening in a vacuum? And it is not. There is what is all beneath the water, below the visible surface. So there's systems and structures in place. And then we've got to ask ourselves, how are these interrelated parts in place, and what influences the patterns that are now pushing this visible racism, this visible unrest above the surface? And then there's the mental models, those processes that all of us have inside our heads, those things that trigger us. That which triggers me may trigger only 2% of the population, or 20%, or 80%, depending on how the AIs have herded you into a belief system. So then ask yourself, why was this aspect of the story that was presented? We could just take a nightly newscast. What's the story they lead with? Why was that single story so important that it superseded every other thing on that editorial meeting? Why was that story the lead story? Obviously, if it's TV, it's going to have video. It's going to have a sound bite from someone interviewed, someone who made themselves available to the world at large through a statement of some kind. And then that was worthy of becoming news. But then to what end? To elicit what kind of response in the audience? Was that story presented to millions of people? Was it to anger them? Was it to provide information that then angered them? Or was it to generate an outrage or a reassuring? Or was it presented to solve a problem? Why was the story presented? And if we look at fake news at a simple search, you could look back, and whether they're on Wikipedia, whether they're on Fact Check, whether they're on even Business Insider had a list of fake stories, and they tend to go to Facebook to look at those. Why Facebook? 2 million or 2 billion people use that vehicle to source some kind of information, whether it's legitimate news or just what their friends have found that's been become, believe it or not, and it's kind of crazy, people's source of information. Even 15 years ago, we used to have to type in a website and then go to that particular blogger's or news source's opinion for what was happening in the larger world. And even then, that person had to go find their information that then they formed an opinion about before they would write up a missive for the day. So debunking false stories, archives, factcheck.org. These are some of these fact check organizations that works with Facebook work with Twitter, with these other social media giants. So who checks the fact checkers? And this really is where let's just say that we're probably not done with lawsuits to determine what is a fact and what is an opinion or what is a narrative. I think that's likely what will happen. Karen says, it's very frustrating when people insert their biases in the proliferation of sharing unverified information. What happens to the truth of Walter Cronkite? And was Walter Cronkite, is he that standard bearer? Is he truly that standard bearer? I can see Dan Rather, who followed in Walter Cronkite's footsteps, and Dan Rather is on Twitter all the time, even though he questioned the 9/11 narrative, and in time, what's the frequency, Kenneth, was let go from CBS for bucking the trend, changing the narrative. His point of view was too important to get away, to get out of the corral, so he was let go. In a kind way, in a nice way, but nevertheless, he was let go. I see you, Karen. First fake news, it was the papers of the grocery clerk checkout line. I agreed. That's mine. Yeah, mine too. So what does fake news look like? False, often sensational information determined or disseminated under the guise of news. So we've got the cameraman, we've got the presenter standing in front of some scene. The scene being, in this case, some ragged, unsettled outlook with, of course, aircraft and puffs of smoke going up. So we've got a manufactured scene. In the simplest terms, that is exactly what this is a manufactured scene. And I can promise you, most of these scenarios are staged. They have to be. The game is too big for them not to be staged. So if we're going to find out what fake news is, and this is back just post the other election, November 18 of 16, fake news is nothing new, but bogus stories can reach more people more quickly via social media than what good old-fashioned emails or print paper or word of mouth could accomplish in years past. People are concerned about the phenomena that led Facebook and Google to announce that they will crack down on fake news sites, restricting their ability to garner ad revenue. Demonetization. Perhaps that could dissipate some of the malarkey online, although news consumers themselves are the best defense against the spread of misinformation. And in my eyes, that's exactly where the responsibility should lie. Let the universe be a free-for-all. Let that information go and let the people decide for themselves. There's enough people out there that see the world as flat. Probably no matter how high you get them, that world will always be flat. But what damage is that? And anti-vaxxers. There was a time humanity survived before that happened. All right, Karen, here you go. First fake news. Hillary, 6 months to live. The Inquirer, the Star. The list is long of those rags, I believe they were termed, at the checkout stand. And there's always maybe a little bit of truth in there. An incredible photograph that you just always captures your attention. You look at it, you stare at it, and you're like, can that really be real? Maybe it isn't. But nevertheless, and then often the stories are more so about fantastic events that happen to individuals who seem to be good, honorable, and upstanding people. But of course, it's a heartbreaking thing that just tears at your heartstrings. And that gets you to buy the magazine, or at the very least, spend 2 minutes and 20 seconds in the checkout line flipping through the pages quickly enough while you're like, yeah, I'm looking at this, don't judge me, as you wait for your line. And so Skynet is a reality. What's the date on this? July 15 of 13, so 8+ years ago. And at what point, I ask, is there just enough truth embedded in the story to make it fake news, or just a story that sensationalizes what is already true, but just not seen by the public? I'm just asking for a friend. So are they telling us things that are truthful, but they have to do it under the guise of fake news? So when it becomes an accepted truth, it can be more digestible. So these platforms, talking the social media giants, were built with the help of establishment power structures. And if you haven't researched how Facebook and a particular 3-letter agency got together, it's really, really a very fascinating deep dive. And these structures are maintained with the consent of those power structures. How come you don't believe that these other ones? Instagram was a great platform, and then Facebook bought it. Venture capital money came in, and these guys who maybe, truly don't know the history of Instagram, but nonetheless, they were an up-and-comer. They had built an audience. They created some kind of pathway, clicks and buttons to be able to take a story, add a picture to it, a narrative, and then share it, that became very, very popular, much like TikTok has now. And as people use it, the people being the product, the more people using the app, the more valuable the product, because you're building people inside a corral, then you're selling the corral with the chattel inside it. So a few giant platforms sucking up all the human conversation to then censor those conversations in alignment with establishment interests is an extremely valuable asset to the powerful, and they're not going to let it go easily. It is an extremely effective weapon against dissident thought. And we have seen that and seen that and seen that, deplatforming, banning, and it is those topics that get excised off the platforms that I have said many times I am most interested in. That which you don't want me to know is all I want to know. So as we get through this, the first the wealthy control the papers, then they control the radio, then they control the television, and now in 20 years' time, they control online speech. It's been the same story for centuries. In each instance, they have collaborated with existing power structures to protect the status quo upon which their kingdoms are built. They did this because they understood the real secret of power, that whoever controls the narrative controls the world. Humanity will only transition into a healthy collaborative way of functioning on this planet when everyone else awakens and understands this truth as well. So let's go back to our older tabloids, maybe something from February 18th, 1943, also with a press date of New York. New York, New York, dinosaurs, they're real and the Nazis have them. Reptilian horde menaces North Africa. A U.S. Army Corps hurtled into action. Now the monsters have monsters of their own, so they're birthing themselves. Is this just fancy? But why would it get the headline? Is there any truth in there? Moon to explode in 6 months' time. The U.S. government covering up shocking truth. And what is the date on this baby? July of 2005. So we've got dinosaurs on the Earth, and we have the moon about to explode. So we've got this kind of tabloid journalism, where the stories can be wholly made up, or there's just a sliver of truth in there, and then the rest of the story is wrapped in something fantastical. So the author, the writer, can give you a little sliver of truth, just enough to irritate under the skin that you're like, something with that just resonates with me, but I don't know exactly what it is. I have to keep reading. So fake news makes money. And that's why the Star and the Inquirer are in business, because they make money. So we're really at this threshold where news that can be fake may also set people free, because we have an understanding of what is going on. And maybe there's a part of the population that will always and only and forever see it as fake news. But to the rest of the population who have chosen to separate themselves from that herd, see that information as empowering, as important to assimilate into how they view the world. And in, I don't want to say the most lowest of terms, the grotesque terms, that is an aspect of freedom, a freedom to choose. And that, I thought, was part of what this country was founded upon. So fake news, also known as fictional news, characterized by outlandish cover stories, we just saw a few of those, about paranormal and supernatural events. Any explicit claims to the truth are obviously belied by their only semi-serious and comedic tone. Okay, conspiracy theory, bad explanations designed to glorify the author and undermine their perceived nemesis, alas, believed by many people and not always benignly. Okay, journalism, here we go, baby. Journalism, professional gathering and reporting of information to society. When errors are published, corrections are issued. Are they? Is that what always happens? Investigative journalism reveals heretofore unknown crime, corruption, and wrongdoing. And these have been presented as with having definite boundaries between them. And I would like to suggest that their journalism would not be doing investigative journalism if there wasn't a conspiracy theory, if there wasn't something that the people weren't completely aware of yet. Because if journalism was just a repetition of facts that were wholly unhidden, then prior to it being revealed, then it would have been a conspiracy theory. Am I wrong? So when does old factual news become new fake news? Something that was as fact admitted in text, but then becomes, something that is completely dismissed as that never happened. Well, and these are just two examples because I don't have a lot of time. And if you want to, we can do these for weeks and weeks and weeks. We can do shows on stories that have been memory holed. Here we are, 6-foot men, but we have skeletons of beings that were much, much larger. And that would begin to explain why some of the architecture, some of the monuments, the memorials, the wonders of the world are so large. Is maybe, remember that movie? It's not that long ago, 5-6 years ago, Downsizing, where they promised the people all of the riches of the world if they would just take their 6-foot bodies and end up as 4-inch people. Might have been 5 inches or 6 inches, but nonetheless, it was to be much, much smaller because then your resources would last. How many people would a marshmallow feed if they were of that smaller size? And that's what's happened from larger to smaller. And the stories in what were factual news is, don't just disappear. You can't delete that stuff because it's been microfished, it's been in paper. So there's a history of very, very large people. And then the Smithsonian doing their best to keep a lid on the narrative that followed either Christianity or Darwinism, something along those lines, has damaged, destroyed, and memory holed this particular story. Even though the bodies from time to time keep showing up, although at far, far less frequency or fewer frequencies than they did a century ago, or certainly a century and a half ago when we were discovering and digging up these mounds all across Middle America to find them as burial tombs. And what was in them was fascinating. The other side of the story exists as well. If we can be big and this size, then why not a little smaller? Much, much smaller. Can you believe it? So then what that opens up is a view of humanity that is incredibly diverse, all different kinds of sizes, and all with a head, with all of the aspects of the brain, the glands, and the potentials, thought, reasoning, intelligence, ability to act on outside circumstances, and a spirituality aspect as well. And that, for me, is probably the most important part, is the spirituality of who we as a race of beings aren't just today, but have been, and ultimately then will be. So if we can be very, very small, we've been very, very large. And this brings us back to how many stories have fallen down the memory hole. What is the memory hole? War is peace, and of course, freedom is slavery. Ministry of Truth, 1984. I had to read that when I was a sophomore in high school. And this is a Wikipedia entry. This topic contains controversial issues, some of which have reached consensus for approach and neutrality, some of which may be disputed. Before making any potentially controversial changes to the article, please carefully read the discussion page dialogue to see if this issue has been raised before, because don't make us look at it again. This is if you were to go in and edit these policies. And there are story after story about technologies that we are pleading for to fix how humanity has treated this planet. Technologies which apparently scientists have invented decades ago but are stuck down the memory hole. And why can't they be brought up? What is holding them back? A second look at the second law, rewriting the second law of thermodynamics, and this is key. Any student going through physics class is confronted with the second law of thermodynamics. And if we could rewrite that to realize that energy cannot be destroyed or created. What is. And if we could redo that law, then our electricals, our electricians could rewire homes in a different way. We would need to ground out all of that surplus power. We could rewire this continent, this planet. Remember, Earth is just a big, fat, rotating battery with a north pole and a south electrical pole, just spinning, just continually winding in this electrical current. So, in 2011, a respected math professor submitted a pro-intelligent design article called A Second Look at the Second Law to the Journal of Applied Mathematics. It was peer-reviewed and accepted for publication until some blogger, whoever that is, wrote into the journal editor denouncing the article, after which the editor violated his own journal's professional standards and pulled the article from the publication queue. The author sued and won. The publisher was forced to print an apology and pay the author's $10,000 attorney's fee, but then they still refused to publish the article. Because today in science, if it isn't published, it doesn't exist. If it isn't peer-reviewed, it's not worthy of our attention. So in 2012, another journal, The Mathematical Intelligencer, published a rebuttal to the article, which, remember, had never been officially published in any peer-reviewed journal. The author wrote a rebuttal to the rebuttal, and then the Mathematical Intelligencer refused to publish it. So if we could change this simple law, the 21st century would hold an incredible potential for humanity. Oil and gas. Oil would be nothing but a lubricant or some medical needs. And then energy from the vacuum, energy from the ethers would simply exist. And all of this angst over CO2, this angst over immediate and urgent climate change, all of this would simply be wiped away. But why cannot, or why can some simple blogger write to a journal editor and get this paper, this research pulled back and not published, ending for a time the hopes of rewriting the second law of thermodynamics? Other unbelievable things that if we knew were out there would also change our worldview. Large things that have stories in the ocean, beings from other places, other technology that is very, very old. Points of view from Julian Assange, a hero to the left when he leaked the secrets of the Bush wars. But now that he's released the truth about Hillary's crimes, because, crime is political, he's a spy that's controlled by Putin and Trump. And if we're a nation that is afraid to let its people judge the truth and falsehood in an open market, is a nation that is afraid of its people. That, my friends, is the purpose of the memory hole. And now we have celebrities who, because of their effects on the world stage or a nation stage like Lincoln, just days after the end of the war was shot, and he told his butler goodbye. He knew something was happening, even though he had dreams for 3 consecutive nights prior to the shooting that he would be shot. But did he stage that? Did he live on knowing that his life was at too great a risk? Are there other political characters, other people on the stage that also have staged their deaths? Have they come back? Might they come back at a point in time, creating a raft of fake news, casting a new light on stories that were long ago buried and accepted as nothing but fact, but need to be reviewed with more information because we've made assumptions about the news that were not true? How many of them are there out there that have stories to tell that will completely change the narrative? A memory hole is a mechanism for the deliberate alteration or disappearance of inconvenient or embarrassing documents, photographs, transcriptions, or other records, such as from websites or other archives, particularly as an attempt to give the impression that something never happened. The concept was first popularized by George Orwell's 1949 dystopian novel 1984, where the party's Ministry of Truth systematically recreated all potentially embarrassing historical documents, in effect rewriting all of history to match the often changing state propaganda. There is a big story that's happening right now that continues to be altered. First, we have to wear a mask. Then it doesn't help. First, we need to lock down because we saw the stuff coming out of China. Yeah, that makes sense. Keep me safe. Keep me safe. When a person's safety supersedes our ability and freedom of speech, our ability to interact, our ability to be human beings, then it's gone too far. Then it's too much. We all have the right to make choices. And if we're not free to make our own choices, there's plenty of YouTubes out there with kids doing stupid stuff, but they learn. They have an experience, and maybe there's a scar, and maybe there's a broken arm, a broken leg, but there's a lesson learned. And we're avoiding learning lessons with this putting safety atop everything else. The dead horse theory. The tribal wisdom of the Dakota Indians, passed on from generation to generation, says that when you discover that you're riding a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. However, in modern business, education, and government, a whole range of far more advanced strategies are often employed, such as buying a stronger whip, changing riders, threatening the horse with termination, appointing a committee to study the horse, arranging to visit other countries to see how others are riding their dead horses, lowering the standard so that even dead horses can be included, or 7, reclassify the dead horse as living impaired, hiring outside contractors to ride the dead horse because that'll surely solve it, or even harnessing several dead horses together to increase the speed at which the dead horse carries you, providing additional funding or training to increase the dead horse's performance, or doing a productivity study to see if lighter riders would improve the dead horse's performance. Declaring that as a dead horse does not have to be fed, it's going to be less costly. Less costly, carries lower overhead, and therefore contributes substantially more to the bottom line of the economy. Or rewriting the expectations of performance required for all dead horses. And then promoting, of course, the dead horse to a supervisory position of hiring another horse. This is where we are. We're at the point where it's time to change horses. There's something coming, and the old systems will not carry us across the bridge to that which is coming. And all that can be deployed to keep us from seeing that the horse is dead is being deployed to keep us on the dead horse. We're almost there, guys. We're almost there. The next month will be big, and the month after that even larger yet, as we recognize and see through the fog and recognize the horse is dead and create and understand and envision new systems so that that can carry us and the generations to follow across the bridge to a better, brighter future. All right, Scott Stevens here on Another Perspective. Thanks for stopping in. Good to see you. Yeah, Ryan, a lot of Nephilim, who knows? Who knows? But it's time to open up the archives, whether they're under the Vatican or the Smithsonian. There's a lot to see, a lot to learn. And who knows what survived the library in Alexandria. That's where I'd like to go. All right, guys, catch you on Wednesday, Tuesday for a look at some weather. And maybe we'll look at cloning. Maybe we'll look at some of these artists and see what's up with that. All right, guys, have a great night. And in the meantime, keep looking up.